Today we are getting close, or we already are, in 10.1.7 in the patch coming live right now in NA and then tomorrow in EU. So we are going first for today with, of course, the class changes coming with the patch. We are getting a whole bunch of other things in the patch, mostly cosmetic stuff, a new activity in the open world, etc, etc. But of course we start with the class changes, which for today are going to be centered on Resto Druid, Mistweaver Monk, Holy Paladin, and then the entirety of Priest, which is also the only nerf for the week, but a pretty big nerf to Priest. So starting with Druid. Druid is getting two new talents. They are getting a change to Nourish and the follow-up dual choice node of Forest Flow and Wild Synthesis, because now Nourish is the one with the dual choice node, which is going to be Grove Guardians. Now you can choose between these two. What is also going away is the Forest Flow talent, the power-up of Nourish. Instead now, Wild Synthesis, which is already a talent to power Nourish, is being extended to also empower the new talent Grove Guardians. This talent is quite interesting as it helps a lot. Resto Druids, for example, continue to heal while moving or while doing other things, while doing damage, for example, while dodging mechanics, because these treants will continue to be healing for 15 seconds whenever you activate them. And then if you empower them with Wild Synthesis, they will be also using Wild Growth as well. So it's a good help for a Resto Druid. What is gonna make this interesting is the fact that right now, whether it is Mythic Plus or whether it is the raid, the Druids are not planning on using these talents. They are not currently using these talents, which means if you want to take these talents in the new patch, you will have to find a way to drop two of your currently used talents to be able to use them. That's going to be the main, perhaps if we end up going for these two talents, the main change for Resto Druids in 10.1.7. The other change, which is a bit more sad, is a change down here. Deep Focus, so the single target extra damage or even extra healing talent down here is removed. Instead, we are getting Master Shapeshifter, which is an extra mana regen plus extra damage talent given to Resto. This can be quite powerful, honestly, especially the Monkin form one, where you gain 2.5k mana whenever you cast Wrath. Whenever there is a phase in a boss where the boss is doing nothing or the boss is transitioning and you can just spam Wrath for a whole bunch to get a whole lot of mana back, this can be very, very powerful. Imagine, for example, the 20 seconds long roleplay of Neltharion when he enters the last phase, or the entirety of the phase 2 of Sarkaret, where there is very, very little damage, and you can just almost regain all of your mana bar as a Resto Druid by just spamming some Wrath in that phase. So it can be very good and very handy for your mana regen, for example. What is the issue here? The issue is that even though it's good news that this side of the talent tree is being used by Druid builds, so it's in the way. It's in the way of the currently meta build. However, it's also against this talent. And this talent is very good. And this talent right now is not going to be replaced by Master Shapeshifter as it is. Number one, because Circle of Life and Death gives damage already, so this entire part of your talent tree as a Resto Druid that gives damage is also covered by this talent anyways, and then this talent also gives you healing. This talent makes your HOTS tick faster, and since almost all of your healing as a Resto Druid is HOTS, this is very good. And this talent has no extra healing for you. It only gives you mana back, but not healing, which means in any situation, in any fight, in any Mythic Plus key where you don't need the extra mana, where you're not struggling for mana, this talent is useless. This talent is irrelevant if it is put against this one. It would have been much better and a much more compelling choice to make if this talent was put, for example, next to an already unused talent, like, for example, right next to it. If you just moved just like 1 centimeter to the right, you could have put it next to Invigorate, which is a dead talent for Resto Druids. So now suddenly you have a much higher incentive in trying out this talent. but unfortunately, as it is put against Circle of Life and Death, doesn't look like it will get much play in this patch. What is perhaps the more weird of the choices is the fact that Blizzard is justifying the power of this new Grove Guardian's talent to be so high that the entire spec needs to be nerfed by 6% in healing. This is quite a bad decision because it effectively tells you you must play with these two talents. Because if you keep playing with the current popular builds of Resto Druids that don't include those two talent slots, you are going to be losing 6% healing, because we are nerfing you by 6% under the assumption that you take these very powerful talents. This means that in 10.1.7, if you don't want to lose that healing, you are going to be having to find a way to put these two talent points right here as a Resto Druid. That is perhaps the only kind of annoying point for the Resto Druid changes in this patch. Then we have the other changes, which are the ones to Mistweaver. Mistweaver is getting some mana, some mana modifiers in here. You have the new talent Energizing Brew to empower your Mana Tea, and then the redesign of Mana Tea itself, as well as the redesign as well of life cycles. So the changes in question are down this side of the talent tree, centered around Mana Tea. So the main change is that compared to before, let's go to the older version of Mana Tea, which is, quite the shorter description. Before it was just a 50% mana cost reduction for 10 seconds on a 90-second cooldown. Now it turns into a stack gaining type of talent, where you can consume the stacks and gain the 50% mana discount based on the amount of stacks you have consumed. This is provided you spend enough mana, arguably more mana regen in total compared to the old version of Mana Tea. You also have, as mentioned, the follow-up empowering talent of Energizing Brew to give you more mana back, so that's an extra bonus to the mana regen of Mistweaver Monk, as well as the redesign of the direct competitor of Mana Tea, which is Life Cycles. Previously it was just a mana regen discount of two talents, Enveloping Mist discounted Vivify, and then Vivify discounted Enveloping Mist. Now you have a change. You have extra Mana Tea stacks for Vivify, and then Enveloping Mist and Rising Sun Kick once more gains more stacks of Mana Tea. So it's essentially a focus down this line of talents for the mana regen of Mistweaver Monk right now, and also the fact that now Life Cycles essentially focuses more on your fist weaving build, essentially buffs more of your fist weaving by making Rising Sun Kick more valuable to your rotation if you want to gain more mana back as a Mistweaver Monk. It's also a decent set of changes because these talents were already down the path of already taken talents of a monk. They're not like the two talents added for Druid, for example, where no Resto Druid was taking them in the first place. So it's also easier for Mistweaver monks to benefit from these changes. After Mistweaver, we have the one very tiny, very minor buff to Holy Paladin. The buff to Holy Paladin is to a single thing, which is a not very already used talent, Tower of Radiance. Previously, this gave your Flash of Light and Holy Light an extra holy power when you cast it on your beacon, and then a chance to still give you a holy power based on the missing health on the target. In 10.1.7, this is made much more straightforward. Straight up, you generate one holy power at all times when casting Flash of Light or Holy Light. It's a very, very minor quality of life, both for the effect itself, but also because it's minor since nobody is taking this talent anyways. Where we have a much bigger and more important change is down the priest line of changes, because Angel's Mercy has been redesigned, now reducing the cooldown of Desperate Prayer by 20 seconds. Back to the current version of the game, this is Angel's Mercy. Damage you take reduces the cooldown of Desperate Prayer based on how much damage you were taking, whereas in 10.7 it is simply a flat out 20-second cooldown reduction. This is very big. That's because Desperate Prayer as a priest is one of your major main sources of defensiveness by increasing your max HP. Basically, a stronger rallying cry, a personal rallying cry for a priest. The cooldown seems massive, the cooldown seems huge, 90-second cooldown. However, thanks to this talent, it was able to be reduced by massive amounts, even down to something like a 30-second cooldown, thanks to Angel's Mercy. So now that this talent is being reduced by a flat number, just 20 seconds, means that this goes from 90-second cooldown to simply 70-second cooldown. So it's a quite heavy hit to the survival of priests in general, since this is in the general tree and it was taken by basically all priests. So the thing we can notice is that it's also a nerf, a sort of indirect nerf to Exodia by nerfing the survivability of Shadow Priest, by nerfing Desperate Prayer. Of course, worth mentioning, it's nowhere near enough in making Shadow Priest weak enough to consider it being removed from the Exodia comp of Mythic Plus, but it definitely does go and hit the survivability of Priests. It might perhaps be a little bit sadder for not the Shadow version of Priest, but the other two. The healer versions of Priest, who also are significantly squishier than Shadow, who have no access to Dispersion, as well as the extra bonus defensiveness of Dispersion. So without Dispersion, they are left with very few other things to survive. Generally, their defensives like Guardian Spirit as well as Pain Suppression are given to tanks or even given to other DPS players and not to themselves, so they are left with not too much, and now the little they have, in this case Desperate Prayer, is receiving a quite significant nerf in the amount of times you will be able to use this defensive. So these overall are all of the changes in 10.1.7. We have some overall positive changes for Resto Druid, albeit a bit weird in the positioning in the talent tree where they have been put in, as well as the weird 6% nerf overall to their healing. We have some overall better changes for Mistweaver Monk, as they are fitting better their talent tree and the talents they were already taking in the first place. A rather pointless quality of life change for Holy Paladin. Perhaps the 6 Holy Paladin players playing the caster build might be happy about that talent change. And then the quite significant nerf to the defensiveness of priests, as all 3 specs are getting nerfed in Desperate Prayer. This is all we have as far as balance tuning, class tuning, spec tuning comes in 10.1.7. The only good news at the release of this patch is that it means now we are just a few days away from the release of the patch 10.2 in the PTR, which means that's where we will start to see way bigger changes for the classes and specs for the next patch, including the reveal of the tier sets planned for the next patch, the reworks planned for specs like rogues, and even the overhaul to discipline that is also planned for 10.2 as well. So that is where we will see way more changes, definitely more interesting than what we are getting now in 10.1.7. However, since the patch is coming out now, it was still worth pointing out what was coming in this new version of the game. So with this announcement out of the way, it's time to leave each other on the eve of this patch release reset. We are starting as usual our goodbyes by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which as usual can still be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. So with these superfluous things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I still need some Mythic Plus keys on 2 different characters, and we still have our Alto raid farm tonight. So crowded.